I'm Scott,
And I'm Mark.
and the world sucks. No, just kidding. Yeah, no, but it has been a week full of headlines, and the more headlines there are, the more I want to just put my head through a wall. Is how that
Yeah,
song goes.
yeah, I can relate. It's not tears in my beer, it's vomit.
Right? But the Eagles, Super Bowl champions, so not that sad.
That's the word on the street. It was mentioned on that Sunday at church that it was Super Bowl Sunday, and I looked at somebody and went, "That's today."
That's today.
Like they thought I was making a joke, and I'm like, "No, I'm legitimately surprised by this turn of events."
Right. All right, so let's get into the stories. Your first one was quite a doozy, um, unsurprising, but really heartbreaking. So why don't you lead us into that one?
Yeah, so this is just one of those that like makes me want to bang my head against a brick wall.
Yep.
So Myers Park Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina, had voted the leadership, that is, by 17-3, to kick out Pastor Benjamin Roswell, because the church was losing attendance. Um, and I'm not sure how that church is set up, like who is supposed to be in charge of, you know, attendance. But like the real thing was that he just wasn't saying the right things from the pulpit.
The right
One of
things. Yeah.
one of the leaders, Marcy McClanahan, had said, Ben has been given every chance to change his words and actions to appeal to a broader audience, but has not been successful in doing so. And that's like number one red flag here, right?
Right.
Appeal to a larger audience. Are you American Idol or a church?
Yes, exactly right. I always thought we were supposed to appeal to an audience of one.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, that's what the church has been teaching for 2,000 years. But never mind that.
Yeah.
But of course, the message that everybody's having a problem with is, well, just generic biblical social justice. We've got to care for foreigners, and we've got to love our neighbors, even and especially LGBTQ people who the church has been historically very hostile towards.
Right.
There's nothing wrong with this message. It's biblically rooted.
Right. It's really interesting that churchgoers have no problem with the abstraction, right? Love your neighbors.
Mhm.
Love it. Love the travelers. Love the immigrants. But the minute you actually start defining, like giving examples, what those things are, the white people get really mad.
Yeah, it's like you mean I have to do something different than
Yeah.
we were doing, in the 50s when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Forget that.
Yeah.
But then it's just, it's like absurd to me, when you have like one of the church members says, like, I'm tired of being indicted because I'm white. And never once has that sentence ever been uttered, truthfully.
Right.
Nobody's ever being indicted. It's like, I'm tired of being banged over the head every week about immigrants and LGBTQ, and I just want to come to church to be encouraged.
Yeah.
Um, I want to hear your take on that.
I've got a lot of takes on this. The main one being, I find it fairly repugnant that the definition of being encouraged is going to church, the place that has been designed to was designed from a foundation of being sensitive to persecution and wanting to do everything in the power of spiritual people to push back against all forms of persecution, right? Political persecution. The Jews have been taken over by everybody over the course of history, right? Political persecution, religious persecution, and that the church is especially sensitive to persecution historically. And it's kind of interesting and repugnant, once again, that we now find ourselves in this place where middle America white Christians want to whine about an imaginary persecution that literally doesn't exist. I find it like I find it completely understandable that people would roll their eyes and just go, yeah, there are better things to do with time than be involved with that.
Yeah, and it's really sad.
Yeah.
And I mean, and from a theological standpoint, like we read about the Holy Spirit, like the word in the New Testament, sometimes people just say paraclete.
Yeah.
But the Greek word behind it is a verb that means to call, to urge, to action, to comfort, to exhort, to for behaviors. And so, like, church isn't a place just to go to be encouraged. One or all of those things can happen in a worship service. And perhaps a church might even need to be in a season of being, exhorted to do something about, let's say, the marginalized in your community.
Right.
And it's really sad to me that, like, the church is almost unapologetically transparent about their bigotry.
Yeah, every accusation is an admission, right? Kind of thing. Yeah, I've got one more thought, and then I'm gonna let you have the last word on this.
Sure.
I find it interesting when I read my Bible that when a messenger of the Lord appears, it usually the first thing out of the messenger's mouth is "Fear not" or "Don't be afraid," right? And I find it interesting that so many Americans are now afraid of the church, the immigrants, the LGBTQ, people of color. It's interesting that America's biggest voting bloc and the people who are called to be the light of the earth are now the people that we're most afraid of. Interesting, and I don't think at all coincidental.
Yeah, I like it. I'm not really going to add anything to what you just said because I think you hit the nail on the head, and especially looking at this next story I wanted to talk about.
Yeah, this one's crazy. This is just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Yeah. So for anybody who hasn't heard, in North Dakota, for reasons that will remain forever opaque to me.
Right. That's such a nice way to put it.
Yeah, like their government, passed was looking to pass a resolution, resolution 30, House concurrent resolution 3020, in order to declare that Christ is Lord, or more like Christ is King.
Yeah.
And like I saw this and my brain just stopped.
Yeah.
And I think blood came out of my eyes and ears as I was trying just to cope with this.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, I mean, we're Christians, like, you and me, and, we are going to affirm that Jesus Christ is the King of Kings.
Of course.
But in no world, except for a Christian nationalist one, does there exist any point in having government publicly acknowledge that fact.
Right.
Government is government. Even if your government is entirely Christians, you cannot baptize, the truth that we affirm as believers in Jesus Christ with government.
Right.
Like, it's just like the most absurd thing ever. And then, like you said, like, people are kind of becoming afraid of churches. Well, this ain't gonna help.
This ain't gonna help. Mark, this would be solved so simply if there was just a constitutional amendment that said that governments would not establish an official religion. Imagine if that would happen. Like, that would be the silver bullet that would solve all this.
Yeah, and of course, like, here's the thing, like, I have a lot of contempt for the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
Yeah.
They are just very bitter.
Yeah.
And they're just overly aggressive, and and how they go about trying to remove religion from public life.
Yeah.
But if I found a pack of these people on the side of the road that needed a ride to court to sue North Dakota,
Yeah.
I'd be like, get in.
Right.
And I'm not stopping for any cops either. It's like,
Right. It's
because
funny. Yeah. No. Go ahead. Go ahead.
well, just it so deeply offends me that Christians feel the need to try to baptize the church with government.
Right.
I mean, it's bad enough when they try to baptize government with the church,
Yeah.
but like this is just so wrong.
Right. I'm no James Madison, right? But there was a bunch of guys who deeply thought and felt about these things and fought with each other for a period of time to understand what are the dangers to democracy. And a national religion, it wasn't the 12th Amendment, it wasn't the 13th or 14th Amendment, it was the First Amendment. It was right there at the top of the list of things to be concerned about to make sure that freedom and your rights are protected regardless of what time you live in, regardless of the fads of the time and the era. Very smart people understood that religions can be used as medicine or religions can be used as weapons. And it's just up to the eye of the beholder as to how it gets used. So yeah, the idea that one person would try to float this doesn't surprise me, right? Congress is full of all sorts of idiots, The idea that a bunch of congressmen would band together in this publicity stunt is disappointing, to say the least, for sure.
Yeah, and fundamentally, like we are supposed to be like loving our neighbor.
Yeah,
and even to love our enemy. That's not things that I'm making up. Like our pastor from Myers Park, or Bishop Booty or Buddy. Sorry.
Yeah.
It's like no, this is in the Bible. This is things Jesus says very explicitly.
Yeah.
And when you have a government in a pluralistic society, that government needs to represent all of its constituents equally.
Right.
And that means not declaring that Jesus Christ is king as an official government act, because you are directly showing contempt for every member of your society who does not agree with you.
Yeah.
And that is not Jesus's love in the slightest.
Exactly right. I was going to say something, but I think that's a better point, and I think we should leave it there.
All right.
Let's move on. We've got a trio of stories that I just put into the basket of sex lies and videotapes. We cannot seem to escape the reality of sexual abuses in our church, no matter how much we want to will it away.
Yeah.
And so we've got a trio of stories here, just kind of under that same umbrella of stories. Vineyard Church in Duluth, they want to discuss accountability for sexual abuse. Or you could discuss it, or here's an idea: you could hold the abusers accountable, right? Second story: Faith Life Church leaders suggest another side to abuse claim, right? So you basically make victims out of the accusers, right? Instead of actually taking responsibility and just saying, yeah, there's a problem, we need to fix it and move on. Instead, you're going to try to make victims of the victims all over again. Well done. Can't imagine that backfiring at all. And then no. And then I think probably the biggest, broadest story is that the Southern Baptists have been rife with abuse claims for years now. And one of the things that they've kind of come up with as a form of accountability is a database, kind of like their own version of a sexual abuse database. And in a stunning move that surprises exactly no one, the SBC is going to abandon that database.
Yeah.
Well done.
What's the correct direction to swipe the SBC? Is it swipe left?
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. Oh, it is just like we keep using the words infuriating and heartbreaking. But it's kind of brain melting to watch the church in America writ large announce over and over and over again in as many venues and as many different ways as possible that sexual abuse is just an imaginary thing in the church. It's just a figment of everybody's imagination. It doesn't happen. And we've refused to acknowledge the reality of it. I don't know how this continues to roll this way.
It's shocking. I mean, especially since there is no shortage of people from the church who it seems like their entire life's mission is to scream about sexual purity.
Yes, that's the interesting part, isn't it?
Yeah. And I mean, especially like in the Southern Baptist Church, like you have a lot of people that are, members of Southern Baptist churches who do things like purity balls.
Yeah.
And if anybody who watches us jabber on about this nonsense doesn't know what a purity ball is, look it up. There are some fun documentaries to watch.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's oh gosh, my brain turned off for a second. It's I was listening to gosh, what was it? I think it was the Holy Post podcast.
Okay.
Which is headed up by Phil Vischer, Sky Jitani. Phil Vischer is the Phil Vischer of VeggieTales fame.
Nice.
One of the creators of VeggieTales. And he was talking about like there being like a politics of respectability in the church.
Yeah.
And they talked a lot about it. And that kind of is what sticks in my mind about this. It's like there's like this obsession with being respectable. And maybe that's what causes churches to go so hard in trying to hide or ignore or just pretend like there's no problem here.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. It's so bizarre. It's like the leadership can't find its way out of its own conundrum. It's like, it's an imaginary conundrum. Like, okay, we have these people who are sinners in our church, so we owe it to them to give them an opportunity to reconcile. And that's what we're going to focus on. And we're not actually going to focus on protecting the people who've been abused, right? Which is equally the responsibility of leadership. When you have a flock, the unspoken agreement is that you protect the flock, and it's actually spoken if you read Jude, back towards Revelation, is actually put out there pretty quickly, protect the flock from the wolves, so it's just interesting to me that we always focus on the redemption of the leader that abused somebody instead of protecting those who've been abused. And that's always the pattern.
Yeah, it's like the church is. It's like a church websites have now all become like Tinder for pedophiles and rapists. It's just like it's disgusting. Like, yeah, I get it. Like this stuff all makes the church look bad. Well, it makes the church look bad because you have prioritized things other than accountability.
Yeah.
Which if I go to a small group in a lot of evangelical churches, I'm going to hear about, well, you need an accountability partner and yada, yada, yada. Well, who's the church's accountability partner?
Right.
I mean, it should be, we should be accountable to everybody.
Right.
Because ultimately, we are. How we behave brings honor or shame to the name of Christ.
Yes.
And, I don't know if it's because people don't think in those terms or what, but it's like, we should be, we shouldn't be worrying about like, oh, gee, how many immigrants are there? Or am I like going to tolerate living next door to, a trans woman? It's like, no, you need to be worried about who is causing harm who is being that wolf among the sheep?
Exactly. How do I want to put this? The things that we do are a direct reflection of the values that we have, right? So when you see the American church over and over and over again, when sexual abuse comes up, the first response is not to care for the abused, but to go out and hire a crisis management team to make sure that the money stores don't get overly depleted. That's not just an action of fiscal responsibility. That's a reflection on your values of what's more important, financial security or the abuse that's been laid upon the feet of your own people, right? And people are going to be mad at me at saying that how you vote is not who you are, or what you do or is not who you are, or how you worship is not who you are. And go ahead and get mad at me. The things you do are a reflection of who you are and what you value. Get over it.
Yeah, and we need to change our focus from giving the accused the benefit of the doubt,
Right.
and we need to start giving the accuser or the potential victim the benefit of the trust.
Right.
And it's disgusting how historically, pretty much everywhere, the victim is often mistrusted before the accused is ever
Right.
thought, oh, you couldn't, they're always like, oh, you couldn't have done this. I know you're the pastor of a church. Like, I can't believe that you would do this. Like, well, I mean, according to a very long document by the SBC, like, they've basically been perverts playpen for decades.
Exactly right. Yep. And here's the thing. You mentioned this before in a previous episode. The witness of the church should come above and beyond the reputation of the pastor.
Yeah.
Right? So when these things are in conflict, it should be the easiest decision in the world. It should take all of 5 seconds to go, "Oh, you've been accused of sexual assault. Guess what? We are sidelining you." Period. Like, as of this moment, you are sidelined until this is resolved. And get over it. It doesn't matter. Until this is resolved, you do not get to be the leader. You do not get to be a leadership function, because our expectation of you was that you were above reproach. And people who are above reproach do not get accused of sexual assault. Right?
I think like no simpler statement can be made.
So yeah, this seems to be fairly straightforward conditional logic to me, and the fact that the church fails at it over and over again, once again, it kind of shines a very clear light as to why people find the church disgusting. It's not that young people don't understand the teachings of Christ and they don't understand the Bible and they don't understand what their pastors and their parents have tried to teach them. It's that they actually get the message. They understand the message and they see the distance between the message and the church as it exists. And they're saying thanks, but no thanks.
And I cannot blame them.
Yeah, I think so too. We have more stories to get to, but I think actually that's kind of the place we kind of need to end. Instead of going to stories I just don't care about all that much, too much, Yeah.
Like, unless we've got some like dank memes or something to like palate cleanse. Yeah, I think we can just move on and go home for the night and do whatever it is us, Midwesterners do it.
I think so. I think, to put a pin in it, the final thing I want to say is, as much as we don't want to, this is going to be some hard truth, okay? This is going to be a little bit of tough love. The reason we give our leaders so much latitude is because we want the same amount of latitude. There is this comedian that I find very funny. He's not at all appropriate. He's not at all rated G. His name is Bert Kreischer, right?
Okay.
And he drinks too much. He eats too much. I'm sure he overdoes it on drugs that he shouldn't be doing, right? But the one thing that he says over and over again is, man, I go from city to city to city and women throw themselves at me. And here's the deal. The only word that comes out of my mouth is no, period. I program it, and it doesn't matter what else I want to say. It doesn't matter who else is around me. The word that comes out of my mouth is no, forever and always. And I think the church needs to take the same position. Instead of taking this position about the LGBTQ or about illegal immigrants, I think the church needs to take that position about sexual abusers. No, not ever acceptable under any circumstances. And until you root out that cancer in the church, I could care less about the LGBTQ and immigrants and all the other stuff.
Yeah, I think that'll preach.
I hope so. Gosh, what are we doing if it doesn't, right?
Yeah, good point.
All right, so we are Church is Lame, and after that little bit of rant, we welcome your thoughts and your comments. We welcome your disagreement. We even welcome your disrespect, right? If you want to come online and call us demon spawn, have at it. I'll upvote that or whatever you like to do on the interwebs. It's all good. It's all good. YouTube, like and thumbs up and subscribe and comments and all that good stuff. If you want to shoot us an email and really let us have it in long form, churcheslamepodcast@gmail.com.
And with that, go in peace and serve the Lord. Amen.
Hey, freaking men.